My wife left me for her boss, but before she walked away, she emptied our entire investment portfolio, 15 years of savings, down to the last cent. My name is Mark. I'm 45 years old, a senior financial advisor at Veltri Dynamics, one of Denver's top investment firms. For 15 years, I've lived by logic, rules, and risk control. I dealt with millions of dollars daily, managing portfolios, spotting patterns, outthinking market chaos. I thought if I followed the rules, I'd be safe. I never realized the biggest risk was sleeping in my own bed. Sarah, my wife, worked in real estate, remote job, flexible hours. I didn't ask much. I trusted her enough to share every password, every portfolio detail, every retirement strategy. I managed the money. She lived comfortably. That was our silent contract, or so I thought. We never had kids, not because we couldn't, but because Sarah said, "I'm not ready." I respected that. I thought I was doing everything right. Steady job, home by 6, dinners out every weekend, one beach vacation a year. We never really fought, but we didn't laugh as much either. Sarah changed, grew quieter, more distant. I asked her once, "Are you okay?" She said, "Fine." Just that. One word, but it was enough to cover up everything she was planning. I had no idea she was seeing Mr. Thompson, her boss, the same man who once shook my hand at our dinner table with a smile as fake as his portfolio promises. I didn't know whether they started sleeping together before or after they started planning to wipe me clean. All I know is they had a plan, and I was the last to find out. That morning started like any other. I woke up early, made coffee, checked the financial news. Sarah wasn't in bed. I figured she'd gone for yoga or errands. Then I saw it, an envelope on the kitchen table. No flowers, no apology, just paper, cold, clean, final. Inside, a signed divorce petition, a bank statement, a short note. "Mark, it's over. I'm starting a new life. Sarah." I didn't believe it. I rushed to my home office, logged into every investment account we had, our retirement fund, growth stocks, long-term bonds, zero balances, all of them. The money was gone, transferred in multiple chunks over the past 3 weeks. While I was buried in a major project, she had slowly drained every cent into accounts I didn't recognize. I didn't scream, I didn't call her, I didn't even go to her office to look for her. I just sat down on the cold kitchen floor where she used to make French toast on Sundays. Now it felt like a morgue. I stared at the transaction history, like maybe it would tell me why, but the answer was simple. I trusted her. She planned this. And her boss, the snake, had the money and power to cover her escape. I, Mark Sterling, certified risk management specialist, never saw the real risk right under my roof. And the worst part is, I still loved her. I didn't just lose my wife. I lost my money, my dignity, and my belief in anything called security. 3 days after Sarah disappeared, I still couldn't sleep more than 2 hours a night. No food, no shaving. I stopped going to work, but I didn't scream or smash things like men do in movies when their lives collapse. I just sat there, still, silent, staring at my screen, trying to trace every last dollar we'd built together. It didn't take long to find the first clue. One of our accounts had been drained in 4 small transactions, each one carefully kept under the radar of the bank's security threshold. Sarah knew how the alerts worked. She'd studied my systems. She used that knowledge against me. The recipient name meant nothing, but the IP address caught my attention. Location, downtown Denver, same building where Sarah said she had occasional client meetings. I traced the address. It was the office of her real estate company. The authorized user behind the login, Thompson. I didn't need more proof. The whole picture fell into place, piece by piece, like a sick little puzzle. Sarah, my wife, was having an affair with her boss, and together they'd planned the perfect heist. They didn't just break my heart, they robbed me blind, with precision. The pain wasn't just about losing her, it was about realizing I'd become the fool in someone else's story. Handing over the keys to the vault, then smiling goodnight every evening. I called a lawyer, Hayden, a longtime friend and one of the best in Colorado when it came to divorce and asset disputes. I met with him the next morning. No coffee, no small talk. I dropped a folder on his desk. Printouts of every suspicious transaction, login record, timestamp, and account trail I could gather. Hayden scanned the stack, then looked up at me. "If this is accurate," he said slowly, "you're not just dealing with divorce. This looks like financial fraud, coordinated, intentional." I nodded. For the first time in days, I felt my hands stop shaking. I didn't want to know why she did it. I didn't want an apology. I wanted justice. I wanted to take back what was mine, even if it meant facing down the system Thompson was hiding behind. Hayden filed an immediate discovery motion, demanding full access to Sarah's financial records for the past 6 months. We weren't just building a divorce case. We were preparing to prove deliberate, calculated asset theft. I returned to Veltri Dynamics on the 5th day after it all imploded. My boss, Garcia, gave me a long look, then said, "If you need time off, just say it." I shook my head. "I need work, as much as you've got." And I buried myself in data. I became a machine, analyzing, tracking, compiling. I stayed up till 2 or 3 a.m. every night, tracing shell companies that might be linked to Thompson. I was the man I used to be, just sharper, colder, focused. This time I wasn't building a future for two. I was rewriting the narrative they thought they'd already closed. I knew I might never recover it all, but I wasn't going to let them walk away clean. She took the money, but she wasn't going to take my mind or my name. And for the first time in years, I felt something settle in me, deep and final. I didn't love Sarah anymore. I only had one purpose now, to make them pay. I'm not suing for the money. I'm suing to make them face the truth. Within the first week, Hayden, my lawyer, filed a discovery motion with the Denver County Court. Under Colorado divorce law, discovery gives one party the right to request the other's full financial records, bank accounts, transaction history, asset transfers, investments, anything within the 6 months prior to the divorce. Sarah and Thompson now had two choices: cooperate and get exposed, or resist and let the court lean in my favor. I didn't care what they chose. I wasn't sitting still. Hayden and I worked almost every day. We organized evidence, documented every transaction, date, amount, IP addresses, anomalies, even Sarah's previous financial behavior, to prove that her recent activity was calculated and suspicious. I sent out formal requests to banks, brokerage platforms, investment tools, anything we'd ever used, to retrieve certified statements. I wasn't a betrayed husband anymore. I was a financial analyst on a mission. Then Thompson moved. A few days after the filing, Hayden received an email from his lawyer claiming this was a routine divorce with no fraud involved. They refused to disclose Thompson's personal accounts. "Big mistake," Hayden said. "He thinks he can hide behind money and lawyers. But he forgot one thing: you're not just a client. You're a player in the same league." I didn't reply. I just smiled coldly. Meanwhile, Sarah remained silent. No response to any mediation invitations. No appearance at the initial hearing. We pushed for a court-issued subpoena. The judge agreed. It wasn't going to be easy. Divorce law in the U.S. strongly protects personal property and privacy. But if we could prove intent to deceive, the court could force full disclosure. I knew that, and I prepared for it, down to the decimal. Late at night, after leaving the office, I combed through every old transaction record. There were transfers I'd ignored back then. Now they were red flags. One investment stood out: an anonymous deposit into a real estate media consultancy, registered under the name of a woman Sarah had mentioned in passing. That woman used to be Thompson's personal assistant. I wrote everything down, built a flowchart. Every arrow, every number, every line, another nail in the coffin. Back at Veltri Dynamics, I held my ground. Despite everything in my head, I never missed a meeting, never let a report slip, My boss, Garcia, pulled me aside after a quarterly review. "I don't know what you're dealing with," he said, "but the way you're holding up, it's impressive." I gave him a half smile. "I've got nothing left to lose," I said, "so I can't afford to fall apart." Word began to spread. Some friends called, some texted, some went quiet. I didn't blame them. In situations like this, most people feel awkward before they feel empathetic. The only one who stood by me was Hayden and the numbers. One night I sat alone in my home office, staring at the evidence wall I'd built. Post-its, printouts, highlighters crisscrossing a full timeline. My heart didn't ache like it did days ago. I wasn't hoping for closure. I was hunting for the end game, by the law, by the book, by force if needed. Eventually, the silence began to crack. I found the first real break late one night while digging through old investment platforms Sarah and I had once used and forgotten. One of the accounts was still active under a login using my birthday. Sarah had once joked it was too easy to guess. Maybe she assumed I'd forgotten about it, but I hadn't. Inside the transaction history was a $250,000 transfer made to a company I'd never seen before, Keller Ridge Holdings, LLC. At first glance, it looked like a standard real estate firm, but when I traced the ownership filings, one name stood out like a slap to the face: Andrea Blake, Thompson's former executive assistant. I'd met Andrea once at a New Year's party thrown by Sarah's company. She'd asked me a few casual questions about trust funds and investment strategies. Polite, forgettable. But now her name sat atop a shell corporation receiving money from my account. Money Sarah had moved in quiet, deliberate steps across 3 different entities. I sent everything to Hayden. 2 days later, he replied with one sentence: "We've got enough to force full disclosure." From that point on, the case moved to another level. It wasn't about collecting more proof. It was about turning that proof into legal pressure, evidence that couldn't be ignored or buried. Hayden filed a motion to expand discovery. We demanded access to all investment accounts under Sarah, Thompson, and any companies linked to Andrea Blake within the past 12 months. The court approved it. The response came quickly. Thompson's side, silent until now, suddenly reached out, asking for a negotiated resolution, offering a reasonable settlement to avoid unnecessary legal escalation. Sarah still said nothing, but this time the silence felt hollow, unstable. I could sense their nerves in the way their lawyers phrased their responses. Not confident, not dismissive, just careful. Hayden told me we could settle. With what we had, I could recover most of the stolen assets and avoid taking the case into federal litigation. I thought about it for a long time, not because I wanted the money, but because I had to ask myself, why wasn't I ready to stop? Maybe it was this: I needed to end this story with my own hand. Not through a deal, not with a handshake dressed in legalese, but with a clean final strike, like the red X's I'd drawn over their names on the chart in my office. That night, I sat alone in my study. The wall in front of me was still covered with diagrams, account maps, transaction timelines, but for the first time in weeks, it didn't feel like chaos. It felt like closure, quiet, still, the calm after a storm. And I realized something else. I no longer hated Sarah. In fact, I felt nothing at all. She had walked out of my life in a way no one could return from. But Thompson and Andrea, they still owed me a reckoning. And I was going to collect, through law, through truth, through numbers that couldn't lie. The official hearing was scheduled for a cold morning in early March. Denver's air was still sharp. Fog lingered stubbornly on my windshield. I sat in the courthouse parking lot for 10 minutes. Not because I was nervous, but because I wanted a moment to look at my hands. The same hands that once built portfolios worth millions. Now they were here to defend something far more fragile: my dignity. I entered the courtroom like I would a strategy meeting, measured, focused, unshaken. Sarah was already there. She didn't look at me. Hair tied up, gray blazer, the last layer of armor she could wear. Thompson sat beside her. He still had the same polished posture, but I saw it, the flicker in his eyes as he glanced toward me again and again. He knew control was no longer his. Their lawyer offered one last deal before proceedings began. If your client agrees to withdraw the motion for international discovery, we're open to renegotiating asset compensation. Hayden, my lawyer, didn't look at me. He knew the answer. We weren't here to negotiate. The judge entered. Silence stretched tight across the room. The initial procedures were quick. Formal confirmations, acknowledgement of filings. Then Hayden began. He laid out our case piece by piece. A pattern of fragmented transfers. A shell company, Keller Ridge Holdings, under the name of Andrea Blake. Login records traced to Thompson's office. Transfer timings perfectly aligned with my business trips. As Hayden spoke, I glanced at Sarah. She sat still, hands folded, staring at nothing. Then I stood up, reached into my leather briefcase, pulled out a thin stack of printed emails, something that wasn't part of the official discovery. "Your Honor," I said, voice even, "I'd like to submit a personal document as supplementary evidence." I handed 2 copies to the clerk and their legal team. One more I placed gently in front of Sarah. She looked up for the first time. Her eyes didn't hold defiance anymore, only absence. "These are emails between the defendant, Sarah, and a personal financial advisor, dated 3 years ago, the week of our 10-year wedding anniversary." There was no need for interpretation. One line was enough. "Can you help me open a private account? I don't want my husband to know, and if I need to liquidate everything fast, what's the safest way to do that?" The judge read silently, then looked at Sarah. Thompson dropped his gaze. Sarah's fingers trembled. Their attorney requested a recess. Hayden replied calmly, "Unnecessary. This came from the email provider's archival system. We have authentication." No one spoke. The judge requested signatures for the record of asset disclosures. Thompson signed, his hand stiff. Sarah reached for the pen but couldn't hold it. Her hand shook. Her face was pale. I walked over, not with anger, not with pity, just timing. I set the pen down in front of her. "If you took everything, at least sign your name to it." She didn't respond, didn't look up again. I turned and walked back to my seat. No applause, no satisfaction. But something inside me settled. By the time the session ended, I didn't need a verdict to feel the shift. Something had already closed. I hadn't beaten them. I'd reclaimed myself. I didn't go home after the hearing. I drove with no direction for over an hour before stopping by the Platte River, the place Sarah and I once sat, in a winter that felt unshakable back then. The wind was cold, the water murky. There was no one around. I reached into my coat pocket and took out my wedding ring. It had sat there too long, like a callus that never healed. I held it tightly for a while. Then I threw it into the river. No speech, no ritual, just a small plink as the metal hit water and disappeared. And I stayed standing. No collapse, no tremble. Back home, I didn't turn on the lights. I went straight to the storage drawer, the one I hadn't opened in months. Inside were all the things that used to mean us. The wedding album, travel photos, love letters, birthday cards written in uneven cursive. Once I couldn't bring myself to throw them away. Tonight I took them all out and laid them on the floor. There was a photo of Sarah hugging me in the kitchen, eyes closed, smiling. There was a receipt from our 5th anniversary dinner with a note scribbled on the back. "You are home." I didn't cry, didn't smile. I just felt one thing. These things no longer had the power to hold me. I packed them into a paper bag, took them to the empty lot at the end of the street, and set them on fire. The flame wasn't big, it wasn't angry. It burned steady and slow, like the quiet end of something that had already died long ago. When only ashes remained, I breathed deep, then turned and walked away. That night, I slept 7 straight hours for the first time in months. No dreams, no jolts. The next morning, I woke up early, made tea, turned on some quiet jazz. I cleaned the corner of my desk and took down the wedding photo that had been hanging behind my monitor. In its place, I taped a small piece of paper. I didn't lose, because I didn't fall. I didn't tell people the full story of what happened in court. When asked, I simply said, "It's over now." They nodded. Some looked like they wanted to ask more, but didn't. I didn't need them to understand. This wasn't a story to be retold. It was something I had survived and buried. I returned to work, not with bitterness, but with clarity. I moved quicker, chose sharper. I didn't wait to be understood, didn't ask to be seen correctly, didn't fear being misread, because ever since I stood in front of Sarah in that courtroom, I had realized some things aren't worth winning. They're just not worth letting destroy you again. One afternoon, I passed by the old jewelry store where Sarah and I had picked out our wedding rings. I stopped for a moment, didn't go in, just stood there and felt still. A young couple walked out holding a small box. They looked thrilled. I smiled, not because I missed it, but because I remembered once believing in it. And I'd loved with everything I had, until it was no longer mine to hold. That night I opened my notebook, wrote a single line. I didn't live to get revenge. I lived not to lose myself again. I closed the book, turned off the lights, and for the first time I felt it, that everything had truly ended, not with noise, not with applause, but with a quiet I could finally name. Freedom. I start each morning with a cup of hot tea, Assam black, the kind Sarah always hated, because she said it was bitter like medicine. I like that bitterness. It wakes me up better than coffee ever could. And more importantly, it's something I chose, just for me. There's no more two-person breakfast, no blender whirring in the kitchen, no half-hearted good mornings over the sound of emails. Just me, silent, unrushed, and not playing a role for anyone. After the trial, I spent nearly 2 months reorganizing my life. Not just the house or the accounts or the paperwork, I mean myself. I deleted every joint investment app, revoked every outdated authorization, and opened new accounts, entirely independent. I reset every password, not out of fear, but because there was simply no longer anyone to share them with. One evening, I stood in the shampoo aisle of a supermarket staring at the shelves for 10 straight minutes. Sarah used to buy it. I'd never paid attention. Now I did. And somewhere in that small moment, I realized I can choose anything as long as I like it. It sounds small, but for the first time in a long time, I felt like I had permission to be mine again. I returned to work at Veltri Dynamics as if I'd never left. But inside, I wasn't the same man. I made decisions faster, firmer. I compromised less, not out of bitterness, but because I'd learned something. Sometimes kindness isn't appreciated. It's just exploited. People at work looked at me differently now. Some were cautious, some were curious, a few more respectful. I didn't mind either way. I didn't need them to understand what I'd been through. I just needed them to know I wasn't someone easily shaken anymore. On quiet evenings, I walked around the new neighborhood. No destination, just to let my feet move freely, the way my mind finally could. Sometimes I passed young couples holding hands, laughing. Sometimes it made me smile. Sometimes it stung a little, but never envy. I wasn't looking for someone new to fill a space. I'd learned to hold that space as my own. One day, I got an email from someone I didn't know, a former employee at the real estate firm where Sarah used to work. It said, "You don't know me, but I wanted to thank you. The way you stood up." It reminded a lot of people that wrong doesn't always win, even if it's late. I didn't respond, but I reread it a few times, not for pride, but to remember justice doesn't need applause. It just needs to happen. I still read the news every morning, an old habit, but now I take time to read actual books again, not reports, not market analysis, books. I picked up Hemingway, Camus, some old novels I never finished back when I was too busy being the ideal husband. There was a line I underlined: "A man is not defined by what he loses, but by how he stands after the loss." I taped it to my fridge. An old friend asked me recently, "Do you think you'll love again?" I laughed. Maybe, but not in a hurry. Right now, I'm learning to love myself first. I used to think that sounded cheesy. Now I know it's necessary. No one teaches you how to live alone again, not after years of making your life about someone else. But once you learn it, even silence begins to feel like home. I'm not sure what the future looks like anymore. I don't draft 10-year plans like I used to. I just know this. Today I still get to choose, to live quietly, to not hate, to not forgive out of pressure, to let go without feeling empty. I used to think a new chapter would begin with something big. A trip, a new love, a door swinging open with some grand sign from the universe. But no, my new chapter began on a very ordinary morning. A cup of hot tea, the curtain half drawn, wind skimming across cold tile floors. Nothing changed dramatically, except me, no longer waiting for change to come from somewhere else. I still live in that apartment, the one I chose because it came with no memories. Every corner was arranged by me, no suggestions, no need to make it fit a couple. I hung a map of the world on the wall, not to mark where I've been, but to remind myself how much I haven't seen yet. I don't know where I'll go, but this time, if I go, it'll be because I want to, not because someone else needs it. One Saturday afternoon, I ran into Sarah at the grocery store. No warning, no awkwardness. We saw each other in the aisle between canned goods and coffee. She was with someone. I don't know if it was a friend or someone new. I nodded. She nodded back. Neither of us approached. Neither of us turned away. Just two people who once knew each other completely, now living lives the other no longer belonged to. I think if this had happened a few months ago, it would have pierced something inside me, but now it didn't. Because I was no longer part of her story, and she was no longer part of mine. Sometimes when the night is too quiet, I remember everything that happened, not with sadness, just like watching an old film. You know what scene comes next, and it doesn't hit the same way anymore. There's a page in the case file I kept, not to relive it, but as proof to myself that I once fell. But I stood up again, alone. Not everyone needs to win. Some people just need to stay standing. That's enough. I started writing again, not a book, not for anyone, just short entries, my thoughts at the end of each day. Some days, just a sentence. It was cold today, but I didn't feel it anymore. Some days longer. I bought a jacket today, one more expensive than I usually allow myself, but I wore it home without guilt, because I've earned it. These little pieces, unshared, are how I've learned to hear myself again. One evening I was invited to a reunion from my old university. Old friends, wine, laughter. Everyone shared updates, kids, careers, vacations. When it was my turn, someone asked, "So, what about you? How's life now?" I thought for a second, then said, "I'm living a life that's not remarkable, but it's mine." No one replied, but a few faces lingered on mine longer than usual. Maybe they understood. Maybe they wished they could say the same. I no longer seek forgiveness. I don't look for revenge. I just hold on to one thing, that I didn't let pain turn me cruel. Sarah betrayed me. Thompson disrespected me, but I don't carry them anymore. I'm not living to outdo them. I'm living to outgrow who I used to be. When I close this story, I don't see it as a war I won. I see it as a road I finished, on foot by myself. No one carried me. No one cleared the path. And when I look back, I don't focus on what I lost. I focus on what I didn't, my integrity, my voice, my self-respect. There's a sentence I wrote on the back page of my notebook. I underlined it in red 3 times. I'm not perfect, but I am free. And to this day, I still believe that's enough.